Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
I'm not.
I was going to say,
Myself for 7 minutes.
I made stuff. I was like, I can't.
My name is Justin Essery. I'm an assistant professor at Rice University. First of all, welcome to the, if you haven't already been welcomed to the conference by me, welcome to the conference. And welcome to our panel roundtable on jobs for methodologists outside academia. I am sure that many of you who are professors have had my experience, which is that more and more of your students are obtaining and actively seeking jobs outside of the academic track. Many of my students, at least, seem to be really happy in their careers. And I, as not being someone outside of academia, am somewhat mystified as to how to advise students who express this interest in what they should be doing and how to get into it, how to get connected to these careers. And so I'm always interested to hear from people who have gotten a PhD in political science and then moved on to bigger and better things. So first, let me say that this session is being recorded for posterity at Neil Beck's request. I guess that's all I have to say. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Oh, one other thing. So I'm going to introduce our speakers. I'm going to give everyone about 7 to 10 minutes to introduce themselves, talk about what they do, and just a little bit of their history and background, how they got into their career. I have a couple of Charlie Rose type questions that I'll get started with. And then I'm going to open the floor for questions from the audience, because I think actually that's probably the most productive use of the time, is to allow people, graduate students especially, to sort of ask whatever questions are interesting to them. So let me introduce our speakers. Phil Schrodt, who probably needs no introduction, at least among this crowd. Melanie Goodrich, Natalie Jackson, Ryan Baird, and Erin Hartman. They all have PhDs in political science. I think that's correct. And they all have jobs that are, well, Phil used to have a job in academia, but now does not have a job in academia. Everyone else does not. Oh, that's right. You're starting UCLA. So yeah. So we have a whole variety of experiences. So I'm gonna start with Phil, and we'll just sort of move down the line. So Phil, go ahead and get started.
Oh, yes, this is on. Okay, so yeah, again, I'm Phil Schrodt. I'm with a very, very small consulting firm called Parus Analytics. I've also, on my blog, asecondmouse.org, you can get it through my personal webpage, philipschrodt.org. I've got basically a summary of all these comments, and then some. Okay, so to answer the questions, how did I get into this? Well, I'd been doing the same thing for about 35 years, and I thought maybe it was time for a change. But more generally, I'd been doing more and more outside consulting, and I found I was enjoying that a lot more than I was enjoying my conventional academic side. So I kind of, I wouldn't quite say drifted into it, but it was a gradual process. And then at some point, I made the complete, well, 3 years ago, almost exactly, made the complete break. I will also be blunt, and it probably comes as no surprise. I was getting kind of tired of most of what I was seeing in political science, except for political analysis, and it was kind of, whereas I was really enjoying the stuff that I was doing as a consultant. Most of my work is is unclassified work for the U.S. intelligence community. So I just felt like it was a better contribution. The other big attraction, though, and I'll be emphasizing this over and over again, is we're at an extraordinary time for people with the skills that people in this group have. The standard set of skills that we call political methodology training are precisely the skills of the so-called data science. You can define data science however you want, but it's a combination of the ability to work with social science theories and data, research design, computer programming, statistics, machine learning, visualization. But it's very, very similar to what we've been doing as political methodologists for a good 30 years. And we're at this extraordinary point where those skills are very, very, very marketable. And so if you're interested in that thing, the opportunities are amazing. And I should also say, as a takeaway, I have not literally for a second regretted the decision I made. It's in fact, if anything, I should have done it earlier. So the other clarification I should make is what I'm talking about here is finding yourself a nice, stable job that will give you an income, more or less what you could have done as an academic. Maybe, probably actually a little bit more. I'm not talking about startups. I'm not talking about becoming the next Mark Zuckerberg or whatever. And this is where I think the opportunities are. There are thousands. There are probably tens of thousands of pretty much invisible to the regular media groups that are out there doing software development, data analysis, and so forth. The opportunities are absolutely huge. So just some quick advice, and again, the blog has more details on this, quite a bit more detail on this, and these are all probably more or less common sense, but trust your common sense. The first, if you've already got an academic job like I do, or you're in a tenured or tenure track position, you are taking more risk, and you need to assess your risk assessment, your family's risk assessment or financial situation. Academia is extraordinarily stable. The downside risk is, once you're in a tenured position, is essentially zero, but so is the upside. Is there, you're likely to finish your career making about twice in constant dollars what you started out with. There's a lot more variety, a lot more flexibility outside the academic environment. The other thing is you're going to have a whole lot more control over your life outside the academic environment. Again, the golden handcuffs phrase is accurate. They're golden, but they're also handcuffs. But that depends on, if you want a nice, you got to be willing to take some risks in order to get some benefits. In terms of what to do, the first thing, and I've realized just how important this is, find a tech center or a city, or it's going to be a city that's a tech center. But this does not mean move within danger distance of the San Andreas Fault. What it means is find a place where there are a large number of people interested in doing this thing. I moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, and give you an idea. Probably nobody in this room thinks of Charlottesville, Virginia, as a tech center. But just a month ago, we had 50 people show up on a summer evening to attend a talk on natural language processing in Python. Okay, so that suggests there's a lot of people, and very few of them were from University of Virginia. It was mostly people. There's in the software field. There's probably 100 or so small software development firms just in Charlottesville. And the way you find these people, now here comes the really bad news, is you got to find a place that is really, really nice to live in, where young people with large amounts of discretionary income really want to live, okay? That means restaurants, that means a good music scene, that means outdoor recreation, brew pubs, means it's going to have ethnic diversity, it's going to be LGBTQ, friendly, etc. These are the places, and Paul Graham, by the way, who I quote copiously on the blog, has a long discussion. The high-tech scenes are places you really, really want to live. And and that is quite literal. My wife and I moved to Charlottesville because it's a really cool place. Only then did I find out, wow, there's a really great tech scene here. Okay, a third thing, and this is by far going to be the hardest, is find a team that you can work with. And again, from my perspective, lots and lots and lots of these groups are small, what I call the baboon troop model. They're about 8 to 12 people. And these are, again, quoting Paul Graham, this is the single most efficient form of economic organization. This is where your return on your labor is probably going to be pretty much the true return. You're not losing a lot to corporate infrastructure or people who are better at schmoozing up to the boss than you are, and so forth. They're also very these are self-managed groups. They give you a lot of control and so forth. That's not the only route. I've got graduate students working in Penn State graduate students working at Google, working at Apple, and so forth. That's another route. But again, it's not just Apple, it's not just Google, it's these thousands of small groups that are doing this. And then finally, the real challenge, and this may take a while, is what you're looking for is a match between your skills, your interests, and the market. And the market, is a strict task, whatever market. You need to respond to that, but again, At this particular point in time, given the convergence of technology, open source and open access, so we've got these vast, vast amounts of data that nobody knows what to do with, or too few people know what to do with, you can set up yourself in business for quite literally the cost of a good laptop and a internet connection. And that may not be true in 10 years. It certainly wasn't true 40 years ago, but it's true now. So I would say, if you've got some risk acceptance, if you're not particularly happy where you are, if you've got those skills of a political methodologist, you should really seriously think about this as an option.
All right, thanks very much, Phil. Melanie, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
I am Melanie Goodrich. I defended my dissertation back in 2009, and once I did that, started at Booz Allen Hamilton, which for those who may not have heard of it, it's a government contracting firm. It means I live in the DC area, and I do work for a lot of different government agencies. I've worked on a bunch of different projects. I do a lot of like survey design and data analysis stuff. I've done a little bit of network analysis and just kind of a variety of different kind of quantitative social science projects. It's one of the, I think the cool things about working in government consulting. You get a lot of exposure, and you have the opportunity to work again in a lot of different areas of the government. I basically, the way for those, I guess, for hearing anecdotes about like how you find the jobs, you know, in case that's useful, you know, I basically in November or December of the fall that I would have gone on the market, decided I, you know, didn't want to go on the market, and I wanted to be looking for a job outside of academia, and started trying to think about what I want to do, and the first thing I did to narrow down is decide what city I wanted to live in, which is kind of a novel concept compared to academia, because it's not often that we get to start by saying what city do you want to live in. So I decided, you know, I wanted to live in DC, and started thinking through kind of what was important to me about my job, the job that I'm doing, and I wanted to be doing methods things, and I wanted to do things that were, like the way I phrase it's kind of scientifically legitimate. I knew that I could probably make numbers say whatever somebody wanted me to make the numbers say, and that's not how I wanted to go about things. I wanted to be like actually like making the numbers like say something like truth. So that helped me kind of then like think through like what that meant about which kind of like industries I wanted to focus on. Started looking into options, talking to people I knew, and discovered that I knew somebody at Booz Allen Hamilton, which, by the way, at the time I had no idea what Booz Allen Hamilton was, but luckily I was informed, and put together a resume and did an interview, and I had basically got a job and had signed the offer by January, and they knew I wasn't going to be showing up until June, and that was fine. So that may not be how it works for, you know, there's lots of different paths to finding a job, but that is one. So some of the things, some of what I kind of wanted to focus on, and I was not clever enough to have started a timer, so that would have been smart of me. So I'm often working in environments where I don't have a cell phone, so I'm still not used to being able to have the phone right there. That's why I got all the paper. I think if you're thinking about a job outside of academia, I would encourage you to think about what do you want in a job, and because in a way, like there's people in academia, there's some variance about like kind of how you work and stuff like that, but there's not that much variance. And if you're looking at a job outside of academia, there's a lot of different things that you can like legitimately factor into like what kind of job you will find satisfying. If you hear that you have to be at the office like at a certain time and you're leaving at a certain time every day, does that sound oppressive or does that sound grounding? Like there's no right answer here. If it's oppressive, you should look for jobs where you can have some flexibility. If you think it sounds like nice to know that you need to be there at a certain time and then you get to leave and you're done, then there's lots of jobs where that's built into the job. Do you, I had notes. Teleworking is a big thing, which in academia is like not what is teleworking? That's just like what you're just constantly in a state of working wherever you are. But there are some industries you can telework in, and some industries you just can't. And there's some industries where it depends on the firm, and some firms will let you telework a day or two a week, and some will not. Some will be cool with you, like they want you there most days, but if you are going to be in the office like 5 hours and then go home and take care of family stuff or whatever, and then log on for a few hours in the evening, that's an option. So do you care about having to work in one specific place, or do you want to be able to work, both at home and at work? Also, do you want to have colleagues nearby or not? My firm a few years ago went to this model where it's called hoteling, which just means that we all had offices and now we don't have offices, and so it means that basically that means nobody comes into the office anymore because we don't have an office there. We have to, just go sit at a desk that's random. So that means that so does an environment like that where you're kind of going to always be interacting virtually with your colleagues? Does that sound good, or does that not sound good? There's no need for you to kind of force yourself to accept certain styles, is because it's not, you can choose. There's options. There's no normative, this is, if you were just a better, at your job, you'd be okay with this. Just find a job that has an environment that you like, that works for you. And then I think that the last thing I will mention is think about what kind of challenges, like methodology challenges, do you enjoy? Especially at a conference like this, I think we focus a lot on the methodology challenges of coming up with the coolest, craziest, new, fancy methodology to tackle some really, really hard problem. And that there's lots of need for that. There's lots of hard problems to try to throw that at. But there's also a lot of challenges out there where you need to have a really good, solid foundation in methods so that you can develop a kind of a intuitive, engaging, simple solution to a problem that will make sense to a non-expert audience, but that you can't create something that is rigorous and actually meaningful and also intuitive and understandable to your non-experts unless you actually have a really good, solid foundation in methods. So it's just a different application of the methodology skills. So I'm going to assume that was roughly 7 minutes and pass the baton.
Thank you very much. Natalie, go ahead.
I'm Natalie Jackson. I work at the Huffington Post. I'm the senior polling editor there, and what that means is I run the part of the site that's pollster.com. For the serious polling junkies, you'll know that used to be a standalone site back in the early to mid-2000s. It went over to HuffPost in 2010. It was a poll aggregation site that Charles Franklin and Mark Blumenthal started, and when I started working at Huffington Post, I was hired in to do forecast modeling for the elections, but then Mark Blumenthal decided he wanted to go back to doing polling, so the whole thing got kind of put in my lap as of November. So excellent timing to have something very large land on you. But so what we do is we find all the publicly released polling, we aggregate it, we build charts, we use models for those charts. There are two different models, both of which predate me, but I'm kind of constantly tweaking them. The basic one is a lowest regression, and the more advanced one is a Bayesian-Kalman filter. If you're familiar with Simon Jackman's work, he's the one who initially wrote that model. And so we're still working off of his base model, just with quite a few adaptations by now. So one thing I get asked a lot is, what does your average day look like? I mean, we kind of have an idea in grad school, you see your professors, you kind of see what they do. What does it look like outside? What does the real world look like? And my version of this is probably a little bit skewed by being in the middle of an election season that is completely bonkers. But basically, every morning I get up and I'm writing our daily newsletter by 7 a.m. Or 6 a.m. when you're in the central time zone. We publish that every morning, usually by 8:30. Sometimes it's closer to 9 by the time we get it out. And what we do is we just round up the biggest news in polling, and sometimes we go a little broader with data research and that kind of thing. But we get that out first thing in the morning. It's a true newsletter. People subscribe. We also publish it on the site as a standalone story, although it's really just, it's a combination of everyone else's work. And then I start playing email whack-a-mole. Remember the whack-a-mole thing? Yeah. Usually by the time we finish the newsletter, I have somewhere around 75 unanswered emails. And every time I step away from the computer for more than about, I don't know, when I was trying to be on vacation, every time I would look, it was like I had 60 new emails, and I would go maybe an hour. So email volume in a media organization is intense. In part because I do work from home. I made an arrangement where I telecommute. It is pretty great. I sit in my house that is like a quarter mile up off the Hudson River in upstate New York, and it's pretty, and I sit there and work all the time. That should ease off, as other guys have mentioned. There's not pressure to be working all the time necessarily. I've had 2 different jobs outside of academia since I finished my postdoc. I'll come back to my exact path in just a minute. And one was very much, you have to be here. You work 9 to 5:30. These are the rules. You don't do anything at home. Huffington Post is very different, especially, like I said, right now, we're in the middle of an election, so, pollsters will release polls at midnight, and there is inevitably some person out in the ether at 12:01 emailing me saying, why is this poll not up yet? And I usually then turn around and ask the media organization that released the poll why they hate sleep. I actually did that one time on Twitter. NBC was releasing at midnight, and I tweeted at the guy and said, why do you hate sleep? So it's a lot of diverse things, a lot of talking to people. I answer questions from reporters. I try to catch things, if they're writing about bad data, I try to catch those things before they go out. I'm not always successful. I don't always win those battles. But I try to catch, keep an eye on any data or survey-based reporting that we're doing. I work with our tech team very closely to keep our web stuff up. I have an amazing web guy who has figured out our code within the last couple of months so that he can make little minor tweaks to my model, just like if he changes the format of something in the data, he can go in and tweak the model instead of me having to find what he changed, panic, and then go fix the code. I do deal with a lot of coding. I manage a team, and that is, managing a team is a very different thing. I've never had grad students. I never went into academia, so I don't know how it compares to working with graduate students, but having someone, well, in my case, I have about 5 people directly reporting to me, and I have to depend on them to get their jobs done, and everything they do comes back on me. There is no independence. I mean, if it's on Pollster or has to do with Pollster, it comes back to me. So that can be very challenging. That's probably the most challenging part of the job for me, is managing people and handling situations where things have gone wrong, deciding what to do, being the person who has to decide something. So it's very much the buck stops here position. So I went from thinking, wow, I'm really glad I don't have to make all these decisions, to when Mark left saying, oh my gosh, I have to make all these decisions. So my exact career path was, I never went on the market like Melanie. I never went on the academic market. I was finishing a dissertation at the University of Oklahoma and landed a postdoc at Duke to work with Sunshine Hilligus. And that was great, but I sat at Duke and I was just thinking, this is not what I want. This is not a good fit for me. And it came down to personality. Not everybody is suited for academia, and pretending that everybody is doesn't get us anywhere. I really appreciate Justin and the program committee for putting this together, because I think this is a very emphasized thing. I had a very supportive committee and very supportive mentors, but I've also been told in a lot of cases that that's not true. And I also have, including yesterday, had people walk up to me and say, well, what are you doing here? Like, really? You're here? Why are you doing this? So I do appreciate it can be a difficult transition to try to go outside of academia when it's all you've been trained to do. But like I said, my personality just wasn't it's really hard for me to work on something if I don't think it's going to see the light of day for the next 3 years. I just can't make myself do it. I still do some research, but I have very good co-authors who keep me moving. So some skill sets that I think are really useful. I see all kinds of job ads across my email every day. Before I was promoted, I had the job title at HuffPost of data scientist. I was getting headhunted all the time. LinkedIn, headhunters were flooding my inbox. I also live in the New York City area, which means there's a lot of activity there for data scientists. So sometimes I hear people say, I don't have a lot of practical skills, and that's completely false. You just have to frame it differently. And I've run way over my 7 minutes. So don't underestimate yourself. Don't underestimate the skills that you have, any coding, any technical skills, anything along those lines are things that you can leverage in a non-academic world. So I will stop there.
Thanks very much. Ryan, you want to pick it up?
Sure. My name is Ryan Baird. I work for the Joint Warfare Analysis Center, which is a sub-command of U.S. Strategic Command, so the Department of Defense. Worked there for a little over 5 years. It's kind of a boring way I got there. I was on the job market, and I applied to this job as well. I was not necessarily sold on academia. I was very interested in policy, intelligence, DoD. I'm former military myself before I went to grad school in the Army. So I was kind of looking at where I thought my skills would be best used as far as that goes. So I had some interviews scheduled, but I ended up talking with these folks, and they offered me the job, and I took it, and that's kind of how I've ended up there. Let me give a little bit of background on the Joint Warfare Analysis Center in general, because I'm sure most of you, if any of you have heard it, I'd be surprised. It's a small-ish command in Dahlgren, Virginia, which is about an hour south of D.C., right on the Potomac, military base down there. It's been around for, 20-some years, a little longer than that in different iterations. Basically, they leverage information from the intelligence community and open source community to answer very hard questions for military customers, such as combatant commands, the Joint Staff, Secretary of Defense, and other intelligence agencies in which we collaborate with. So we are constituted mostly of engineers, so you can imagine that kind of thing, but we have a social science and economic function as well, which I am part of. The reason they actually were interested in hiring me was my core training was in econometrics, which was what they needed at the time, but I wasn't strictly a statistician in that regard. I had some experience with my dissertation using some agent-based modeling, a little bit of game theory, even some QCA, just happened to dabble in that a little bit. And where I work, that's an important thing. You can be good at your job and very focused in something, you can only know stats, but if you're going to move up with where I work, you're going to learn new methods that you have never been exposed to at that. I have done that. I never did any social network analysis in grad school. Now I'm fairly competent at it in that regard. So I'm not trying to tell you if you only know one method, oh no, but I think in where I work and in other agencies that I'm familiar with, people tend to be more successful when they consider that they have a large toolbox in which they can answer a question in any which way that is appropriate, and not saying, no, this has to be answered in a statistical manner or a game theoretic manner or what have you. And then I'd also like to reiterate, what Melanie said earlier is being able to explain these types of methods and why they matter to people that have no experience in them is very important. You're going to deal with, in my profession, talking to very important generals and other people, and they want to know why your numbers tell them something different than people that they've worked with for years, and why they should listen to you and not what their experts say as far as that goes. So if you can explain that in a reasonable manner, they may listen to you, they may not, but usually they'll take it into their decision-making calculus, which is important. I'm going to talk a little bit about, in a very broad sense, because I have to, some of the projects I've worked on to give you a better idea of what you could experience working within the DoD or the intelligence community as far as that goes. What's important to understand, because even I didn't know this coming out of grad school working in this agency, is we are asking very sometimes specific questions, either at a tactical level and sometimes at a higher strategic level. We tend to answer more strategic questions now due to working for U.S. Stratcom, as far as you can, as far as that goes, which maybe if you understand, or you all do understand, but Stratcom cares a lot about deterrence, which should not be surprising to you. So in that regard too, we also work in long-term and short-term. So sometimes we work in crisis planning, so quick turnaround questions, 2 days to 6 months. Sometimes work in contingency planning, which is the O plans for combatant commands and how they should react if somebody does something that they don't like, as far as that goes. Our command, and a lot of commands have this as well, we have an R&D side, which is long-term research, which is actually, that's what I do mostly. So we're talking projects that are scheduled 3 to 5 years out. So some new methodology or something that has not been applied to DoD questions, let's go ahead and bring this in-house and try to make it work for us, and that, as far as that goes. And then we have the short-term R&D, which is, hey, we want to know what so-and-so is likely to do in this, within 6 months, or we want to know what this network is going to look like if this happens to it, or something along those lines. Those are short-term, more operational questions. I've worked on both sides of the house. Really, timing is one of the big things. How much time do you get to work on a problem, as far as that goes? So quickly, just some of the projects that I've worked on. One of the first projects I worked on was actually an agent-based model looking at population sentiment, and basically we were trying to forecast what certain populations may or may not do in terms of their sentiment based upon military courses of action. So if the military does X, how will the population react? Good, bad? How will they react to their own government, our government, or any other groups? That was a short-term kind of project, so we already had the model in-house, so we really just need to do the analysis and tweak the model a little bit, the code. A longer-term project, which I've been working on with the Naval Postgraduate School, is an ABM where we're basically trying to estimate the flow of communication upon different groups within society, whether it be mass media or social media, and in conjunction to potential effects of rebellion or spreading of rebellious ideas. As far as that goes, not point estimate, but maybe looking at ripeness of a society or something along those lines. This is a completely unclassed thing that we've been working on because really there's not a lot of data on this. That's why we're starting. I mean, there's a lot of theory, but not a lot of data in that regard. And another thing which I don't think has been touched on, if you're interested in publishing, you can work in this realm and still publish. Now, a lot of times you can't publish directly what you're working on, but I published a chapter based upon this work and how it could be applied in a separate area that didn't do with what this is. So you can do those kinds of things. It depends on the security of the area you're working on. We recently, this is a good example of a short-term turnaround, finished an econometric forecasting model of looking at a particular type of event, whether we could forecast it happening based upon the historical data we had. We had some success with an out-of-sample forecast based upon 30 years of data, so we went ahead and started forecasting into the future. Luckily for us, we did have some success in actually forecasting things that actually did come to fruition, so that model has been taken, and we're kind of running with that in that regard. We've done some game theoretic modeling on just policy bargaining types of aspects, trying to basically make a general model of specific models in the literature. How can we generalize it so that other analysts can use it to look at lots of topics? As far as that goes, since we've moved to Stratcom, we started working on what we call an escalation model, a game theoretic model, trying to look at off-ramps. Where would the model tell us if you get into an escalation where you might be able to tamp down the escalation? As I said, I've got into social network analysis a little bit. This is probably the least IR/political science. There's really no theory other than just methodological theory in this. We were literally just trying to take networks that had a lot of double counting and a lot of we didn't know who was talking to who, and is it the same person talking? Is it the same person with several different lines of communication, or are they different people? So a lot of deconfliction type of work to try to make these networks as accurate as possible for the further analysis. So we had some success in that as well, moving beyond what the literature said as far as that goes. I can talk a lot more in the Q&A. One new project starting up, which I'm in charge of, which I suggested, and you get to write, this is a good point too, not only are you just answering questions, sounds like you don't get a say in what you're doing. A lot of times, a lot of these agencies will have, well, if you want to propose a research project or something that you think is helpful, you can write what we call a white paper, and it will be evaluated, and if it's deemed to answer a question that the, your higher ups think is necessary, and you justify the time and resources and money, they'll approve it and you can run with it. And in that regard, I'm starting a project on what's called inductive game theory, trying to improve some of our existing game theory models based on how players learn over time. It's a little different than evolutionary game theory, but it's similar if you know what that is.
All right. Thanks very much. And finally, Erin Hartman.
Hi. So I just started tenure track at UCLA. So you might ask the question, why are you here? I sometimes ask myself that, and I'm just very grateful. I don't ask any more questions. But I think there's a few reasons. One, I'm still riding that Obama 2012 train for another 4 months of glory before the next big thing comes out of campaign analytics, or at least before we get to read about it. So I was actually at POLMETH in Princeton when somebody clued me in to the fact that campaigns do lots of cool analytics, and that there is this woman working on the Obama campaign, and she was a political methodologist, and we had very similar brains, Amy Gershkoff. So I went, and 3 weeks later, went from POLMETH basically to Chicago, and was working with Amy doing media analytics, how to use data to better inform media strategy. Switched over to the analytics team in 2012. You may have read about it. We apparently did a lot of really great things, some of which I think we actually did, some of which I still wonder about. But it was a great experience. I got to run the polling operation for the analytics team, which is like a really big polling operation. Redid the methods for that. Then went back and finished my PhD, and had this very hard decision of what to do on the job market. And ultimately decided to start a company with some colleagues from the 2012 campaign, and started a campaign analytics firm. So that company's still there. I'm happy to talk about it. I cannot hire you today. Like if you actually want a job today, talk to these people. But I figured I think what I bring to this is a sense, at least after I went on the job market, I got a lot of questions from graduate students about like, what is campaign analytics? So I would talk a little bit about that. But before I do that, and they don't know I'm about to say this, one thing that I do think is missing from this table that is a really big avenue for political methodologists, and I know one that was quite tempting to me, are things like, and I'm going to look at Hannah at Microsoft Research, Drew over at Facebook Research, really truly research-driven organizations, like not consulting, not like day-to-day tangible, like, impact stuff, but like research as we think of it, and I think you guys should, maybe people ask questions, you can help answer those questions, but something else to consider. Okay, so that's me, that's why I'm here. Hopefully that's helpful. And so after I went on the job market, like I said, I talked to a lot of grad students. I had a bunch of them call and say like, hey, I'm just kind of curious more about this campaign analytics thing. How could I get into it? Where do I start? What is the world like? Question one for me was always, have you talked to your advisor? Please talk to your advisor first. I think as is evidenced by this panel, the field is much more open, but I also remember that apprehension about talking to my advisor and saying I was considering something other than academia. You're looking at this person who has helped you in your career quite a bit, and they made a very different choice than you were considering making. And that is very nerve-wracking, and I have found that people are generally pretty open and supportive. My committee was, your committee was. It is possible that maybe there are people out there. I actually haven't seen it as of recently. So talk to your advisor first. You're going to need them to be hopefully supportive, and they can be quite helpful. And I don't want to be, I will not answer questions if you have not talked to them, hopefully. So campaign analytics, as I understand it, and this will be true for about 4 more months, and then I will no longer know anything about how it works. When you think about the progression of how campaign analytics happen, and I'm going to caveat this as I worked in Democratic politics. I cannot speak to the other side, although I assume there's a similar structure of some, or similar, I hope. You're getting what you paid for from me right now, which is my broad brushstrokes of what's happening in this world, and it's, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I had a joke about not wanting to sleep, but Natalie already. So if you don't want to sleep, go into campaign world. So campaign analytics, in 2008, you had a team that kind of proved the idea and got a lot of buy-in in the Democratic side that showed that you could build a predictive model and often better than chance, although not always better than chance, predict how somebody was going to vote and whether or not they'd turn out. That core, few people was housed in the DNC in 2010 and grew the team and really showed that you could do very more sophisticated work. That team grew in 2012. It went from the DNC to the 2012 analytics team, grew to about 50 people. And then after that, as happens, as far as I can tell in campaigns, that group of people, the DNC could not keep them, could not afford to keep them, basically, and they started their own consulting firm. So now a lot of analytics, campaign analytics, is housed in these consulting firms, and there's a bunch of them out there. But if you're interested in that type of work, there's a few avenues that I think you can pursue. So if you want to do a campaign for the people in this room, consider a presidential campaign. They're the only ones who can pay to kind of give you an interesting problem to solve. Otherwise, you're going to be on a very small team, and you're probably going to be doing work that's more like, how do I take this model and inform, strategy? But you're not going to be building models. And you're probably not going to be. You're going to be implementing more than developing. That's a general rule. Maybe there's some really great Senate campaigns that have a lot of money that would be otherwise true, but so if you're interested in that, presidential campaigns or these firms are fruitful avenues to look. The other interesting thing to me is that polling firms and analytics, polling was a very traditional institution in campaigns, and they have been figuring out how to adapt in this world of analytics. Do you work with the analytics teams? Do you work with the campaigns? Are they in-house? Are they not? And what I have seen is that a lot of polling firms are now developing their own in-house analytics teams. So that's another avenue to look. And I think, if you'd want to consider one of those two, you'd want to consider, do you want really big data but a fairly shallow problem of predicting how somebody's going to vote or if they're going to vote, versus you want really in-depth data but maybe a little less of it, which is kind of how traditional polling firms work. And then the weird other world that kind of started in 2008 and therefore doesn't speak as well with the analytics teams is the digital analytics. And so if you're interested in digital data, social media, those are all, a lot of them housed in these digital firms, and digital analytics is its own kind of beast in that world that works with but not typically housed in the same firms as campaign analytics. And that data is also really fascinating, but it's not voter file data, it's behavioral data. And I think there's a lot of people in this room who would be interested in that. So it's just really kind of broad landscape, and I think it's worth exploring all of them if you're interested in this type of thing. And then if you're more interested in being that person who translates, then there's a lot of opportunities also in things like unions, and labor unions have their own analytics teams, or there's big clients that work with the consulting firms, but your role can be the in-house analyst who takes these models and these tools and helps communicate them to the client and implement them in a sound and effective way. So if any of those appeal to you, like I would encourage you to really explore that space, because very often I find that people come to me and they're like, well, I want to work in campaign analytics and democratic politics. I looked at the 3 firms that have their mission statement as campaign analytics for democratic politics, and like, what do I do next? And I think the world is pretty broad, and I'm happy to answer more questions about it, but that's kind of an avenue that I think you can take. And then, of course, in 4 months, none of this is worth anything.
All right. What I'm going to do now is, Andrew and Braden, can you come up here for a second? I want to have roving mics for people to ask questions, so that the main reason is not so you can be heard, but so that you'll be on the tape. Those should be good to go. And while we're waiting for the first question, just raise your hand if you want to ask a question, and one of our roving mic folks will come over to you. I'm going to ask the first question, which people may be embarrassed to ask you, so I'm going to endure the embarrassment on behalf of the room. So, very brass tacks questions. What can an entering person leaving academia expect in terms of salary, and in terms of sort of how you're going to, the availability of jobs? Because I can tell, my students a lot about those 2 questions in terms of academia, but I know virtually nothing in terms of anything outside of academia. I guess I did work at the Burger King. I could talk to them about that. So if someone wants to, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, the median salary for a programmer, and I think that's broadly defined in Charlottesville, is $76,000. There's a figure out there, I have no idea where they made up the data, that the median salary for a, quote, data scientist, if you can sell yourself as that, is about $128,000. But basically, you're going to be looking at the high end of what academic salary. Now, again, you're looking now at a 12-month salary and rather than a 9-month, But I think generally these salaries are going to track the higher quality, the higher level academic salaries.
I'll jump in there. I think it also depends on which kind of direction you're trying to go and where you're trying to live. Obviously, salaries in New York and DC are going to be, well, hopefully much higher than other places. Media world is not one you go into for big salaries. There's also a trade-off. You can make considerable amounts of money. Part of the firms that were headhunting me for a while were financial firms, and they really, really pay.
Define really pay. That's what I'm exactly trying to get at.
I was seeing offers of like 140. But of course those were, Wall Street financial forecasting firms that would be extremely high stress. There are trade-offs. You get different things. There's also a big trade-off that I don't think I completely thought through, so I want to mention it. In academia, you're almost guaranteed, provided economic times are decent and you're productive enough. Generally, there are raises every year, usually. Sometimes that's not so great. But in most sectors outside of academia, there is no guarantee. There's no guarantee that you're going to have a job tomorrow. There's no guarantee that your salary is ever going to go up. So you do have to look at that as well when you think about salary starting figures.
Melanie, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I can speak to, if you were looking for a job at a government consulting firm, I'd say that coming out, PhD, lots of political methodology these days, I would say you'd probably be making 70, maybe in the 70s, maybe 80s. it's a little bit better a few years ago. Government contracting there's a pendulum, and we have recently been swinging in we hate contractors, and contractors are evil, and we don't want to pay them. So that when that happens, it is harder to keep keep jobs, and be paid as much. So I would say today it'd be 70s, low 80s.
And I'm actually kind of in the middle of what they're saying, in that you're probably going to start around 70, maybe a little higher, depending on, and the government too, there's a pay band depending on what city you live in. So DC area is what I'm talking about.
Are you on the, so are you on the GS scale?
GS,
Yeah.
there's the GS and GG, depending if you're intelligence or DoD, but it's similar, very similar. So the nice thing with this is you might start a little lower than a contractor, especially when we're starting. So I started about at the high end of contracting, so I know I was making less than some of my friends. However, I have basically, after 3 years, pretty good job security. You're vested in your retirement, as far as that goes. And as was mentioned earlier with the government, more or less up to a certain point, you do get, if you're doing good work, you get raises every year. And you know what you're going to get, so you can plan on that, unless there's, you have a continuing resolution, or
Right.
hey, we, got sequestered. I sat home and didn't get paid for 2 weeks, and Congress decided not to give us back pay. You plan for that kind of thing too. But that's rarer than not. So as far as, it's kind of in between. You're going to make more as a contractor, but there's there's more uncertainty. Government, there's a little more certainty, but you're not going to probably pull in the big bucks.
Since we brought up the budget stuff, I will point out that usually Congress will go back and pay the people who work for them. But if you work at a big enough consulting contracting firm, they will usually have covered your pay. But if you work at a small one, you will not be getting back pay. So when the government shuts down, you are not getting paid. So that is a little fun, exciting uncertainty there.
And there is the risk tolerance, as Phil mentioned, is something to think of. I know people that love working in those 12-person shops, but if they, for some reason, happen to lose a contract, they only may have one contract, so.
I will say, Campaign World pays postdoc-ish, right? It's like maybe a little bit better than a postdoc. You take a cut. You also only have a job for a year and a half. Keep that in mind at the good end. The analytics firms do pay, I would say, on par with what sounds like the contracting work. But I am going to make a pitch, because this was something that is not a skill set that was taught to me in grad school, and I learned along ways. Always negotiate, and read about how to do that. Just don't be afraid. The worst that somebody says is no. But I think it is just generally, as a rule, a really useful skill set, and one that when you're already nervous about the fact that you're jumping into a world that you feel often untrained for, you're jumping into a world of people who have work experience and have a better sense of what their value is. And you don't, because you're coming from making a sad amount of money as a grad student, and all of a sudden $40,000 sounds great. And it is, but it's not what you're worth. And so make sure you negotiate and ask around. And those things were, I think, kind of difficult. And like you said, questions that you don't want to ask, just ask them. People are pretty open.
I'll just pitch in as an academic. You should negotiate in academia too. That's definitely not just for, yeah.
And you can even negotiate with the federal government, so.
Well, that I
when
didn't
you
know.
start. I mean, they may argue you can't, but if the job says, this is where it starts, they're gonna push you at the lower end, because your skill set's probably not a lot of experience.
Right.
But you still may be able to go 1 or 2 steps higher than what they offer.
Hi, I have a question. And this is for the people who are interested in getting these sorts of jobs. What are the tangible and intangible skills that you guys are, the hard and soft skills that your employers or your agencies would be looking for in a resume? And what's the best way that a grad student or somebody who isn't a grad student could market themselves to you?
And can you just, when you ask a question, could you introduce yourself, say your name and your institution?
I could do that. My name is Gina Yanatel Reinhardt, and I'm at the University of Essex.
Go ahead, Erin.
I'm happy to start. So if you're doing campaign analytics, know Irish data, know some statistics. That would be great. That's not a problem for this room. SQL, all the data is housed in giant databases. No SQL, and then so there's kind of the hard skill sets. I did a lot of hiring very, very frantically because startup life is like that. And for me, one of the things that was harder to find, but when it was there, was indicating not, like, don't send a resume that says, I know how to do, XYZ different statistical methods. Like, typically we were trying to hire somebody who was going to be a pretty, especially at the senior analyst level, a self-motivated and competent analyst. And so we were looking for people who indicated they had identified a problem, taken an interesting approach to that problem, and could explain their approach to a variety of people. So that's very consistent with what everybody here said. And so, but actually putting that in the resume, like trying to indicate that in the resume as an interesting problem. You're all PhD students. You wrote a thesis. Don't tell me that on the phone call when I ask you, what types of issues did you encounter when tackling that problem? Say, I didn't encounter any, or how did you get buy-in for your solution? Oh, everybody just loved it. Like, none of that's ever true. So answer that question. And then the last thing that just would really get to me is do some research on your interviewer. I had a non-trivial number of people come to me and they'd be like, oh yeah, I'm in academia, you wouldn't know anything about that. And I'm like, well, actually, and so don't talk down to your interviewers. Don't, assume that they know what you're talking about, and ask them to, confirm with them that they do, and try and get a sense of how, if they're following along, and if not, then go back and explain. But don't talk down to people.
I echo a lot of what Erin just said. R, Stata, Python, any of the standard things like that are very good. Java, code, show that you can know how to code or do stats package, stats, a little game theory. Like I said, but we just went through a hiring. I was on the committee, and I can't speak to all agencies, obviously. But one of the important things is we're going to ask you questions that you have never thought about, because unless you have DoD experience or something like that. So it's important that you show that you can think strategically, and that you know how to, really, when you think of a PhD, you know how to think. That's what you're getting trained at, not just, you're smart, you can pick up a package. We're not going to not hire you if you don't know R, because I assume you can learn it, that kind of thing. But can you actually think through the question? When I ask you a question, this is kind of an example about, how to answer something in a multi-method kind of way, and you just bring it back into your dissertation and stats, you're not really giving me evidence that you can strategically think through what I'm asking you. Of course, stats. That's probably why I chose to interview you. So as far as that goes, because there's just, we can't, DoD, intelligence community can't tell you exactly what you're going to be doing. So you need to be able to show them when you're talking to them that you can just think strategically through a problem and communicate. So.
Ryan, I assume you're going to have to get a security clearance.
Yes, you will have to. Well, I can't guarantee that, but it'll say that right in the ad 99% of the time, I guess. There's trade-offs with that, too. Security clearance makes you eminently hireable if you want to move, if you already have one. Security clearance, if you're not an American citizen, is not going to happen. Security clearance, if you are a dual citizen, means you'll have to give up that dual citizenship. Security clearance now, given the hacking, it takes a very long time to get. So depending on the agency you're at, sometimes they will hire you and say, you are hired, but we're not going to pay you or give you anything to do until you get your clearance. That can take a year, more, depending on how many foreign contacts you have. That's a big one, things like that, or how long, I was lucky where I work. We're very nice. If we deem you, we go through, our security folks do a interview and do a little background check quickly. You get an interim secret clearance, and we bring you in. We have a special place where you can work at secret, and we give you some things to do. We pay you, and while the rest of your clearance goes through to the higher levels. Part of your continuing that job is you eventually get that clearance, but we're giving you things to do and you're learning about the agency. Other agencies don't do that. Some do, some don't. That's just kind of something I would ask, because I'm not sure if they tell you that right away. My agency did, but I can't speak to all agencies. So
one of the things you definitely want to like communicate like that you know the programming languages that you know and the stats and all that stuff. But if you're going to if you're interviewing for a job that's going to be any sort of kind of collaborative environments, you are going to want to try to signal that you can work with the diverse group of people, that you can work well with and work well with people who, say, don't have PhDs. One of the things that I was very stunned by when I first started was that there were some people on the team that I joined who had an immediately like very negative reaction to me. And I was like, I don't understand what's going on, and figured out that it was because I had a PhD, and I was like, okay, I did not expect that to happen. And then quickly started interacting with some of the other PhDs that my team was working with, and I was like, oh, that's why. So there are people out there with PhDs who treat people who don't have PhDs unpleasantly. Try to signal that you're not one of those people. Well, try not to be one of those people, and also try to signal that you are not one of those people. Also, I think the other, so that's something that when I'm interviewing, like that's kind of something that I'm trying to kind of get a sense of. The other thing I think that PhDs have a kind of a reputation for is not dealing well with deadlines. And everybody deals with deadlines, like there's, to varying degrees. Sometimes deadlines will be completely unreasonable and will have been, set because the manager thinks that like by setting a completely unreasonable deadline, that will somehow change the time-space continuum or something. So the fact that maybe you've not always met every deadline ever is not the end of the world, but like some sense of trying to send sub-signal that you were able to like make a plan, to conduct some research, have a basic timeline for when you're going to do that, and keep to that timeline, or at least in some sort of reasonable way, is an important thing to signal.
Let me, I think the next question is Neil.
Yeah, so actually very related. How important is credentialing? So I'm often asked, we have a master's in data science. Do you need the whole master's? Is one or two courses enough? Or if machine learning from yourself, is that okay? Or do you really need a course or whatever, MS in statistics? So how important is the credential, to signal, again, what you know?
In my world, it's what you have on GitHub that determines your qualifications. Yeah.
And for the government, especially if you're going through USA Jobs, they're going to ask you core competency questions. You need to be able to explain why your experience or education, how that ties in directly. So it doesn't necessarily, I have a degree in. You need to say, I have 5 courses in X, and I did this project, which directly applies to this as far as that goes. Because if you look at what they're hiring for, it'll say you need these experience levels, or you can substitute education. So that's the point. If you actually have experience in that, so you have the training and you did a project for an independent contractor or whatever, that is just as good as long as you can convey that to the hiring.
Can I jump in here? Because I often read these ads and they'll say something like, you need to be an excellent statistician, have programming skills in R and Python and C++, play the cello at a professional level, and it's like, who is this person you're looking for? And I wonder, are they serious, or are they just laying out a dream list?
Both, and what it is what they'll end up doing is they're hiring for a GS level, a range, right? And so what they're doing is, if you are an expert at everything, then you're going to be possibly hired at the highest pay level they apply. So if you're, if you're not missing, but if you're lower skilled wise, you're going to, GS7 to GS13 usually or GS9 to GS13 is a good range. So you might come in at a 9 instead of a 13. A lot of PhDs where we work, they usually, just given your education level and stats, you come in at an 11, you're promotable 12, 13 as far as that goes. there's kind of a game to getting through the wickets of the USA Jobs. It changes every so often.
Which, to clarify, USA Jobs is a website where the government posts jobs.
USAjobs.gov is the main. Now, other agencies, CIA has their own way of doing it. Jobs that the DIA posts will also show up on USA Jobs, but sometimes they show up earlier on DIA's website. So you want to look around. Undersecretary of Defense, OSD for policy, they have their own website. So you just need to kind of look around as far as that goes. But most jobs go through, our jobs go through USA Jobs as far as that goes. Basically, some of this advice I got, which I think still seems to hold because it's a bad algorithm doing the first run, picking people through, not humans. So basically, if they tell you, I want this, you literally copy and paste what they want in the thing, and then you directly, right below, explain what your skill set, why it does that. And you always rate yourself maximum. And then they'll weed you out, or the humans will weed you out later if they don't believe you, or you don't do a good enough job explaining that. So.
I would throw one more thing in. Sometimes, and this is true of government jobs but in not just government jobs, sometimes when you see something that's like a really very specific description, sometimes that's actually because they want to hire somebody specific. They have to release something. They have to make it publicly available, and they've made it very, very specific. So there literally is one person that can
Right.
fill that.
First
So
name must be James.
Right.
Last name
Well,
must be
yes.
Smith.
Usually they're a little bit better about that, but if you are reading through it and you're like, this is really specific, maybe just. I mean, if you got spare time and energy, emotional energy, go ahead and apply, but maybe don't, because it probably means that you could be God's gift to this job and you're not getting it because they already have somebody that
That's a
they
really
want.
good point.
Yep.
Walter?
Yeah, this is, I guess there are two parts to this question that may or may not be related that kind of seem to be related in my mind. One is the difference between choosing a so-called non-academic job and a non-academic career. Some of you I'm hearing, and it strikes like you choose a job and it's obviously part of a career path, like becoming a GS person and so on. You're in the government, you could have a career doing that in an obvious way. Others, not so much. So Erin, it's a year and a half you just said, then you're going back to school, and I know Amy kind of changed that. And I'm not sure, Phil, if you want to talk about, choosing a career, doing the consulting kind of thing you're doing, it sounds like that could have been. But the other part of the question is maintaining or not maintaining ties to academia. And I know I met Phil at a conference in Europe last year after he'd already made a switch, so that's kind of a connection to academia. I don't know if that was more active. And Brian talked about publishing papers and stuff. I'm not sure if these are related. Some people I know, you could go off and work for 3 to 5 years and go back to particular kinds of academic jobs which like that experience to be part of the job, like business schools or public policy kind of schools and something like that. But I wonder if there's a difference in your minds about choosing this job for new PhDs now rather than thinking about choosing a career.
I guess I'll start. I'm kind of in an in-between place. I like that question a lot because I pose that to myself all the time. You get into corporate world, and Huffington Post is very much corporate. We're owned by AOL, which is now owned by Verizon. So it's layers deep in corporations. And people change jobs like they change underwear, it seems. And so for me, I'm wondering how long I do this. I am keeping a foot in academia, conferences, keeping some academic style research. And I'm realistic that ever wanting to come back completely to academia would be extremely difficult because, you need a record to get a tenure track job. You need the publication record. You need all the things that we know you need to get a tenure track job, which you don't do when you're in a non-academic job. So I think there is a little bit of an implicit choice in taking a job that you may want to keep the door open, but you are probably limiting yourself a little bit because everything I've been told is that coming back would be extremely difficult. Not impossible, just very tricky. And the second part of the question is, I stay involved in conferences and everything because, in part, I just like them. For some reason, I actually enjoy being around political scientists. Maybe because I am one. I have to remind people of that. But the main issue is you can't always fully participate. Like I couldn't come to any sessions this morning because I had to work. Work doesn't stop when you come to conferences. So I think that weeds a lot of people out, or their employers are not necessarily supportive of that. Or more fundamentally, people in the academic world aren't always the most accepting of people in the non-academic world coming into their research world. Like I said, I've had good experiences, but I've also had some negative stuff come my way. So I think the discipline's getting better at this, but there is still, I still have gotten very condescending remarks hanging around academia.
I want to direct this question specifically at Erin because you have had a very unique trajectory.
Yeah, so I did leave and come back, and it is hard. I think my job market I was really thankful for, and it was weirdly a lot of fun because I was coming back and I got to talk about research, and that's why I wanted to come back. And so maybe that was the people tell me I'm a little strange for that, but. I think when students have asked me this question, like how do you maintain both? I had to work pretty hard at it, for one. Like I tried to keep my face as much as I physically had time to do in the academic world because I liked it. And I think there's a few ways you could tackle it. And this is once again where I would actually partially direct this question to people like Hannah and Drew who have found jobs that are very research-based, and I think that's one way you can keep yourself quite in the academic world while being in the non-academic world. So that's one avenue, and I think Walter's right. If you're interested in campaigns, that can be a job and not necessarily have to lead to a career. And for me, it was a really valuable experience for a lot of reasons. One of which was to learn a whole lot about campaigns and politics, and in a very real, tangible way that I think has made me a better researcher. I also got a whole bunch of other experiences, like managing people, which I totally agree is really hard, and quite a learning experience. But it was made clear to me that the door was closing when I went on the market, by a few different signals, and that I kind of every year had to kind of think about it, what were my options and how much more was that door closing. And for me, once I decided I really, really missed research, it was a pretty clear decision. But I think the one thing that I noticed on my market that probably other people don't experience, and it was a totally valid question, is that I got a lot of questions about, like, are you really interested in academia? Are you in this for the long haul? For me, I was quitting my job at a company I started to come back, and so for me, I think it was a pretty credible signal. But I think that's something that you should keep in mind if you are a student who is managing this, is that kind of, that is not an invalid question, because you have sent a signal, and so you should think about that. You should think about why you're coming back. What is the appeal? For me, it was pure research was the appeal of coming back, and so it was worth the very difficult kind of path to get there. And it took a lot of work to make sure that I stayed in touch with colleagues. I kept up with my research as much as I could. I went to conferences when I could. I went to a lot more East Coast conferences in the couple years I was in DC than I did West Coast conferences. But and until you kind of make that active decision, I think it's worth keeping that door open. But it's not like you just get to walk back through. Like it will be hard, and you can hope for the best. But I think it's not, hopefully not impossible.
We have just under 5 minutes left, so I want to ask a concluding question. What was the most surprising thing? So all of you have obviously, by virtue of having a PhD, spent a lot of time in academia, some more than others. What was the most surprising thing about going from the academic world to the non-academic world that you wouldn't have expected when you made the transition? And Phil, since you talked a little bit about this, I think can you start with this?
Yeah, for me, it was just how easy it is to start up your own business. I think it's quite intimidating if you've been always in the academic world. But the guy that cleans your gutter probably has a LLC and a license and better have insurance and all that stuff. People do it all the time. And in academia, you don't see this part of the world. Once you get out of it, it's everywhere. And again, the other thing I would emphasize is just how many of these small groups there are where people are living very nice lives, making very nice incomes, again, not Mark Zuckerberg, but perfectly nice incomes that are out there. The tech revolution is really driven by these small firms that you never see in the newspaper, you never see on movies and so forth. There's just, again, thousands of them out there.
I think there's a couple of different things that surprised me, but I think one of the kind of most startling experiences was within 6 months of having started my job, I was put in charge of a project where there was a budget of $500,000, and we were supposed to be making decisions about some survey, and nobody seemed and that was up to me. There was and this was somebody else's money. It wasn't my money, and I was gonna put something in a field and do something, and I was does anybody want to check this or talk to me about this or nope. That's you're on your own.
Although if something bad happens, they'll probably want to talk to you.
Yes, that is true. That is true. But yeah, there's no peer review. There's no just we're sure you wrote a great questionnaire. Go for it. You're all right. So that was a new experience.
A lot of responsibility.
Yes.
And which it must be especially startling because as a grad student,
yes.
You have control over that massive $25,000 or whatever stipend. And
that was really exciting if I had that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sitting here spinning the wheels trying to figure out an answer to this one. My first job out of my postdoc, I think the surprising thing was how much management there was. You're not in charge of your own time anymore. You're doing what other people are telling you to do. And that does take some adjustment after, in my case, 5 years of PhD and a year of a postdoc where you have a lot of freedom. You have to get your stuff done, but you have a lot of freedom. So that's a substantial adjustment. I'm kind of back to a more free-form, work all the time attitude now, but.
The two biggest things for me was pretty quickly, you can be talking to some pretty important people about very important things that are affecting a lot of potential lives and other things. So, you need to take it seriously, not that you wouldn't, but it's not just abstract research at that point when you're making a theory or a model or something along those lines. And the other thing is, which I was very pleasantly surprised, is that you can tell important decision makers that their idea is wrong and you have evidence why, and they'll tend to believe you if you can explain it well enough.
Well, so when I first started the campaign, I think what amazed me, in academia, I'd spend a lot of time, you spend 90% of your time on the last 3% of the project. So sometimes that can feel really oh, I haven't done anything. It just goes so slow. And I think to me, when it got to the campaign, the first time I called back to my friends, I was hey, what are you working on? How was your conference? And they're working on the same projects they worked on 3 months ago, because that's how academia works. And I was oh my God, I've done 20 projects in the last probably week. My hair was on fire, but they're all done. So I think just the fast pace and how easy that transition was, kind of surprised me that that it and it is exhilarating, and you can it's also exhausting, I will warn you, but that just how fast things really can move, and how quickly people can make good decisions on what I think as an academic I was oh, is that enough information? And it ends up well. The other thing that I realized was how hard it is to write a one-page memo. So
It's often harder, I've found, to be brief.
Oh, yeah.
Because, my default mode is 50 pages now, which,
But how many
Yeah.
footnotes do I get? Can I have a page and a half of footnotes on my web?
Right.
No.
well, I want to thank everyone for coming. I think I speak on behalf of the panel when I say that these guys will be around for a little bit. If you'd like to talk to them about it, I'm sure they would be, willing to, for the price of a drink perhaps, talk to you a little bit about this. We're going to post the video to the web at some point when I, sleep it off from organizing the conference. So if you want to use it as part of your teaching or part of your advising, I encourage you to do that. Thanks to all our panelists, and thanks to the audience.